G'day guys, Disney Dave coming at you once again from Down Under. Welcome to the very first edition of Behind the Classics. Today we are taking a look at the very first film in the Walt Disney Animation Studios classic canon. Of course, being the very first feature-length cel animated movie ever made. The project was so ambitious that film journalists would go on to call it Disney's Folly. Released in 1937, it is of course Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. In 1928, Walt Disney released the first ever Mickey Mouse short. Steamboat Willie was the very first cartoon to have been produced with synchronized sound. That is, one with a pre-recorded soundtrack, which didn't require someone to perform music and sound effects live in the theatre. Because of its innovative nature and lovable main character, the cartoon, along with Mickey himself, became an enormous hit. In addition, Walt Disney became a household name, one that is still recognised by children and adults around the world almost 90 years later. In 1929, Disney premiered his Silly Symphony cartoons. Just as Steamboat Willie had before them, Walt's Silly Symphonies became some of the most groundbreaking cartoons of all time. Walt used the shorts to experiment with animation, colours, special effects, and thus advancing not just animation but cinema on a technical level. For example, 1930's Frolicking Fish was the first cartoon to display overlapping action, giving cartoons a more realistic, less stylized appearance, in which characters actually abode by the laws of gravity, instead of defying them as they had previously. 1932's Flowers and Trees was the first cartoon ever to be produced in Technicolor, and the first film ever released in Technicolor's 3-strip process. 1934's The Goddess of Spring was produced as an experiment in animating realistic female characters and human movement. And 1937's The Old Mill was the first animated film to use the multiplane camera, giving animation a realism and three-dimensionality that it had never seen before. The Old Mill, above all others, became Walt's major experiment, a short in which he also experimented with lighting effects, colour effects, and water effects, with depictions of lighting, wind, rain, and water splashes. It was also Walt's first animation to depict realistic animals. Unbeknown to many, these shorts were Walt's testing ground for something even bigger, better, and more ambitious. Walt wanted to do the undoable. He wanted to do something no one had ever been brave enough to do before. He wanted to create the very first feature-length, cel-drawn animated film. And with the advancements that he'd tried, tested, and proved successful in his Silly Symphonies, he felt it was time to take the greatest undertaking of his career. For Walt's first feature, he chose the Grimm brothers' tale of Snow White. This was a no-brainer for Walt, as an early silent film based on the story, which he saw at 15 years old, is what inspired him to become a storyteller in the first place. The production of Snow White began in 1934. This was of course concurrent with Walt's production of the Silly Symphonies shorts, which would so shape the film. In fact, Walt's filming methods for Snow White changed multiple times over the course of its production, due to the many technological advancements he'd made in animation with the shorts. Being that Snow White was the first full-length cel animation in history, Walt struggled initially to find support and funding for the film. He was laughed out of nearly every bank and distributor he took the idea to. Those in the film industry began referring to the movie as Disney's Folly, or in today's terms, Disney's foolish idea. Almost everyone was convinced that Walt would fail in his production of Snow White, and even his wife Lillian and brother Roy O. Disney reportedly attempted to talk him out of making the movie. The common consensus was, even if Walt succeeded in making a full-length cartoon, audiences wouldn't be able to maintain attention or interest. Some even claimed that watching that much animation at one time would send entire audiences blind. Not one to be told what he could and couldn't do, Walt assertively embarked upon the production of his film. He even put a mortgage on his own house to help fund the movie's ridiculously climbing production costs. Initially, Walt expected the film to be budgeted at $250,000, 10 times the cost of a regular Silly Symphony. But as production ran on, it rose to almost $1.5 million, a ludicrous amount of money for any kind of movie in the mid-1930s, and about the equivalent of $25.3 million in 2017. The production of Snow White was long and tedious, and was plagued with various production issues, including the animators' continuing inability to properly animate human characters realistically, which proved to be a major problem, given Walt's insistence that the movie's characters be lifelike instead of being like cartoon characters. Some of the production's most famous stories come from the writer's room, in which Walt was present 100% of the time, helping to build the story and characters with his writers and animators. This was very much his film. He would often be seen acting out the entire movie over and over and over again, at the request of the animators, who were in awe of his enthusiasm and uncanny ability for storytelling. For the film's gags or comical moments, however, Walt wanted to involve everyone at the studio, encouraging absolutely anyone to submit gag ideas, with a reward of $5 being awarded to every single person whose idea was used in the final film. This was a nice little bonus, given that $5 in the mid-1930s was the equivalent to $120 in 2017. Of course, the final product of the film completely defied all expectations of Walt and his Folly. After the film's premiere on December 21, 1937, which ended with a standing ovation, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was praised across every publication around the country. Time magazine even put Walt and the Dwarfs on the cover of their December 27, 1937 issue. By the end of its theatrical run, the film had made over $7.8 million worldwide, making it the highest grossing sound film of all time, being derailed soon after by Gone with the Wind in 1939. The film made enough money that Walt was able to fund the construction of his animation studios in Burbank, California, which still stand to this day. Snow White is such a favourite of mine. Not just because of its wonderful story, or its dazzling animation by Walt's 9 old men, or even because it was the first, but because of Walt's personal tenacity in making the film. The real-life David and Goliath story of a man defying all odds and pressures placed upon him by everyone, but a scarce few who believed. In retrospect of Walt's entire life and career, in forming his entertainment empire and in changing the way we view and consume media, this is such a recurring theme, and one of the reasons I adore and idolize Walt as much as I do. What we can learn from Walt and his folly in making Snow White, and even in his second folly that was the creation of Disneyland, is that a dream is the strongest thing on the planet. And combine that with ambition, a little faith, trust, and pixie dust, and you can make any dream a reality. And as far as I'm aware, no one has been blinded by the film in its 80-year history. So that's certainly a commendation. Thank you for joining me for this installment of Behind the Classics. If you've enjoyed this mini documentation and would like to join me for future installments, to make sure you keep up to date, please, after the jump, hit subscribe. Thank you once again for watching, and to absolutely everybody out there, I hope you have a magical day.